It can't.
Yeah, and it's part of something that you are literally going to interact with. And in
Yeah.
the case of that warehouse example we just used, that system is going to be used hundreds of times a day, every single day. Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the In the Trenches Roundtable series. Today we got a special topic, something we haven't really dove deep into before, but it's access control. And who better to talk about access control than our director of installation, Gil? How's it going?
Hey, James. How you doing, bud?
Not too bad. Ready to jump into this topic. And for today's episode, we're going to break it up into three different topics. First off, a high level look at what is access control, some of the benefits and the components to some degree. We're going to bring it into the real world with a use case example. And then the third and final thing, we're just going to give you a rough idea of the cost on that. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. What is access control?
Okay, so I did something fun. I just was curious if I actually entered that into Google to see what it would come up with. And this is one of the this little explanation from Wikipedia actually cracks me up because it's so technical. But here we go. In physical security and information security, access control is the selective restriction of access to a place or other resource, while access management describes the process. Okay,
That is quite technical. Yeah, it's more
that is
technical than I
quite a
thought.
bit, right? But
Yeah,
I think to you and me, access control is literally what it says, right?
yeah,
Controlling access to something. Not always a building, most of the time. But I think in simplest forms, that's the best way we could lay it out, right? We are controlling or restricting access to something, usually a building, but it could be a server cabinet. It could be medication cabinets. Lots of
yeah,
things you can restrict access to. These days, we're restricting access to our cell phones and computers. So people are actually using access control in their daily lives and don't even realize they're using it. So
yeah. That's
yeah,
a great
let's
point.
keep it simple, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's extremely technical for Wikipedia for sure. Yeah, I think the way I would put it for most people, if you're in an elevator and somebody's asking, "Hey, what is that access control thing?" Which happens all the time, by the way. I would always be like, "It's a system of electronic locks that allows you to control who, and then most importantly, is when somebody should be granted access to, like you said, usually a
Yeah.
building." And so Yeah, in a nutshell, it basically allows you to say, John can access the building between 8:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. And if he tries to access it at 2 a.m. in the morning, he's not going to be granted access, which is very different from a traditional key and lock system where the key is who can access, whoever has that key can access, but you don't really have a time-based, object with a key. So um, that's
Or
kind of
knowledge of,
the key
or the
benefit.
capability of tracking who is
Yeah.
actually coming to the building using the key, which is what a lot of I think a lot of people that want to monitor who comes and goes into their business and buildings. I think that's an important feature.
Yeah, that gets into the entire system aspect of it because with access control, everything is being logged. If you went to the door and you were allowed in, that's logged that, hey, John was allowed into the building.
Right.
If you're going in and for whatever reason you're declined, that is also logged in. And all throughout the course of the day, when you arrive, when you're leaving and coming, it gives you incredible insight on what's going on with your facility. And that's
Yeah.
all within most access control systems. Logging
Yeah.
is a huge part of it.
Yep. Agreed. People don't realize access control actually encompasses a lot of things and can incorporate a lot of different um, technologies into it, and within the security realm, really control a lot of things if you really want to take the time and effort to go that far. But for base knowledge of access control, which is kind of what we're working on right here, um, keeping it simple, that's basically what we're going to talk about. It's just who can get in, when they can get in, and how they can get in. You know?
Yeah, and to go into more of maybe the physical side of it for no somebody who's never used an access control system, the way it works is you get something called a credential, right? And that credential can be a key card, a badge, a key fob, or as a lot of the modern ones now, a cell phone. And you present that credential to a piece of hardware known as a reader. And that reader's on the exterior of your door. And if it's a key card, you tap it to it and it reads a little data that's on it that says, goes back to the system and says, is this person allowed in or not? And if you are, of course, the door gets unengaged and unlocked. So, or unlocked, excuse me.
Right. Yeah,
And
no, that's it. I mean, and credentials, like you said, take on many forms these days. And, there's there's a lot of different ways that you can assign a credential to something or someone. What you said was a code or a card, could be a finger, a thumbprint, a handprint,
yep, pins.
hand geometry, they call it, facial recognition,
Yep,
which is a lot of being used on a lot of phones. That's all basically a credential.
yep,
And then the most important thing is that the way you use a credential is kind of an aspect of the security side of it. And I always tell people there's three types. There's what you have, which is a card or a key fob. But what you are, which could be a fingerprint or facial recognition or hand geometry, and what you know, which is basically a key code that you would punch in. So between those three, you can do one of, you can do multiples, or you can do all three, which is what we are now, referring to as multi-factor authentication, I
yeah.
think. So
Yeah, and one of the things about access control, and one of the things that makes it a little difficult to like really put it into a nutshell, is the fact that it is like completely customizable to whatever you want as a business owner, as
yeah,
a facility. Um, if you're in a
exactly.
on a per door basis too, right? So your main entrance, maybe you just want one factor authentication, but then your secure IT closet, maybe you want both
Right,
the credential being presented, and then also you have to put in a PIN. And that
right.
just prevents somebody from potentially stealing that credential and so on and getting into your door. So yeah, that's one of the key aspects too, is like if you can dream it with access control, most likely you can do it. There's
Absolutely.
it's such a
Yeah.
mature like product suite, everything like that nowadays, that you can do basically anything that you want with a little bit of programming. So
Even the most basic access control systems I've ever seen or worked with are super customizable.
yeah.
It's kind of weird. And then
Yeah, no, it
you
is.
get
It's
into the
overwhelming.
really high end ones, and you can do anything with those. You can control whole buildings with those, like
Yep.
every aspect of the technology. It's really sky's the limit, how much you want to get involved in it, and then, of course, price, right?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. More complexity, more price, and all that
Right.
fun stuff. But let's jump into like talking about like like these credentials, and one of the major benefits of access control is the fact that it's very easy to onboard and also offboard, users at the facility or employees at the facility.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, especially if it's an environment where your workers are coming and going with access control. Like you just said, it's really to onboard and offboard them easy. When you're having to give out keys for people to get in and out, you're chasing down keys if they ever leave the company, or you're having to change out lock sets, and that's never conducive to a smooth working relationship with your building, because you're just going to be constantly doing stuff like that and trying to track down things when it's so much easier to just kind of strike someone out of the record, and then they're done.
Yeah.
So good point.
Yeah. And so to onboard an employee, you log into the interface, you put their username, put their name, first, last name, give them the credential, which can be just an email that they set up on their phone these days as well, if you wanted to, and then they're good to go. And you can set the access parameters, everything right there, without even necessarily having to interact with that person or having to find them and get the credential to them.
Right.
But I think the offboarding is even, as important as well, because, and this comes in a couple different scenarios. So the first one is somebody leaves and you either have to, like you said, get the key back from them or anything like that, and some of
Right.
the usual setups. But for this one, like you mentioned, you just go in, you know, set suspended, and then even if that person has that credential is not going to work at the door. It's going to deny them access because it's not a evergreen key or something like that. And then
Right.
even maybe just as importantly is people lose things all the time. So maybe somebody was out and lost their key. They left it somewhere, couldn't find it. now you've got some key out there that potentially is like a security hazard if they happen to find out where it is. If they don't have a key and they have just a key fob or or a key card or something like that, and they lose that, they let the person know, and they can immediately, disable that credential. So even if
Right,
somebody has it and knows where you work and tries to get in, they're not going to be able to get in, and they're going to be notified that there's been a denial too. So
right.
um, I think like the onboarding and offboarding is, once you get into a certain size of building too, like that, there's a lot of like when you have who should get access control is a really interesting question because it could be, you can really access is sort of going down in terms of like smaller businesses might benefit from it now, but like there are a lot of facilities that onboarding offboarding is necessary. They wouldn't really be able to operate as they are without access control. So
Right. And it's usually, I think these days with most companies, it's ran through the HR department,
yeah,
in a lot of cases where it's just part of what the package that they present to you when they're onboarding you is your access control credentials and what you're allowed to get into versus what you're not. And then when you're offboarded, the same thing. You turn in your laptop, you turn in your phone or whatever else you have, and they also just strike you from the record. So it all kind
yeah,
of fits. And remember, there's a lot of nefarious people out there that say they lost their keys, but they didn't
yeah.
really lose their keys, and then it's a security issue for sure.
Yeah, because then you gotta potentially, like you said, change out locks, and that's not
Right,
fun, and you gotta reissue all those
exactly.
keys to everybody else that has keys, and then you gotta
Right.
figure out who's opening the door in the morning to let people in and stuff. So
Well, we
I
all
think that's a
remember the days of seeing the maintenance guy with this big, like 5-inch diameter thing full of keys, like that seemed to go halfway around it, right? And fumbling through keys for whichever door.
yeah, oh yeah.
Alleviates
Uh,
all
that's
that.
yeah. Yeah, so really in a nutshell, if we were to just give a put it together, access control is there to make controlling who has access, as the name implies, to your building much easier, much more manageable, and much more visibility, I think is the way I would kind
Absolutely,
of put a pin on it. So,
for sure. Yeah.
um, the other thing we probably want to just give a brief thing is like who actually installs access control. Because, if you're used to us for maybe some of our camera products or anything like that, those are products that we can professionally install. You can install yourself. You can potentially hire somebody with, cameras are relatively easy to install. Access control is maybe not the same way, is it?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, so I kind of go back to the early days where access control was a keypad back in the day, right? Way in the early days, it was a keypad, and the keypad functioned as its own entity. Didn't tie into a panel. You didn't have to run cable to it. You had to power it, and you had to tie it into some kind of electronic locking hardware. But the keypad held all the information. You programmed it with a special programming sequence. You programmed codes into it, and that was access control.
Yeah.
The problem with that was that was simple to install. Anyone can probably throw a keypad on a wall and maybe get some power for it. The problem is the electronic hardware associated with that to allow the door to open. Um, that's where things get a little sketchy because you're cutting into frames for a lot of cases, or you're attaching um, electromagnetic locking devices to these frames, and then those require special egress to open the door. So that's where you get more involved into the more technical side of the installation, and not just that, you're also introducing the door into life safety code, which, because we all know the door has to let people out in an emergency. So I think that's kind of where it all morphed. And then access control took off from keypads, obviously, to where we're at.
Yeah, and to like put that in a frame, and this is something that is a life safety product.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's something that, you've got to get professional installation for. This isn't something that you can, learn through YouTube probably, like you might be able to do through cameras or
Right.
something like that, YouTube University. But you definitely don't want to. So to put it in a nutshell, this is professional installation only. So if you are interested in it, just keep that in mind when you're getting it, because this is also a thing that needs to be inspected. It will potentially get inspected, or most likely get inspected by somebody fire marshal or somebody like that to make sure that it's reaching all of the different requirements for the way that the locking hardware works, the ADA requirements, and then all that kind of stuff. So if you don't do it right, it actually could even, close your business potentially, right?
Right.
Think that's a good jumping off point now. Let's bring this into the real world. I got this map here that is a warehouse distribution plant. And they've got, as you can see here with these orange dots, they've got three doors on the exterior. They've got a main warehouse entrance. They've got a secondary warehouse entrance, and then a third one, which they typically only use for, emergency reasons or, something else like that. And then on the other side of that, we've got an office entrance for the exterior. And then we've got doors interior, so inside the facility, one that contains their IT closet, and then they also have one that is to and from the warehouse. So that allows people from the office to access the warehouse if needed and kind of vice versa. So um, let's talk about like some of the benefits of what this facility potentially is getting. Let's start with like the warehouse to kind of break it down by role and area.
Mhm.
What's some of the benefits the warehouse is getting now compared to if they didn't have access control?
Well, okay, so a lot of times warehouse work is being done at different times than office work, for sure. So, setting timelines for when people can get in and out is going to be a little different, and you might have shift work also. So there's the controlled access portion, right? Not even just talking about the security side of it, but saying who can come in when, because this is when their shift is, and so on, or that maybe we're operational from these timelines, but certain individuals can be in around non-operational times for certain reasons, maybe supervisors and managers.
Okay.
So that's one thing. Also, a lot of times warehouses can be dangerous depending on the type of warehouse you have. So you do want to restrict individuals from getting in there based on just safety reasons. And so your office people might not be allowed to get in the warehouse because they just don't need to be there.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff I think is really kind of revolves around that. Then you do have obviously the security side of it. I'm sure the warehouse will contain um, monetary value in it, right? Whether it's products or services that you're doing. So you definitely want to secure the area.
Yeah, and so the way this works too in terms of that security is, and this is customizable, like we mentioned. We could talk about 20 different ways you can do this, but in most cases, in this particular case, the way this works is those doors are locked 24/7. And in order for that door to become unlocked, you've got to go present your credential, and assuming you're allowed during that time period and that day, and into that door, the door's gonna unlock and you're gonna be able to open it. So in short, obviously that makes it much more secure than potentially having those doors open throughout the course of a day, or the manager comes in, the first shift manager comes in and he unlocks it and they don't lock it again until the end of the late night shift kind of thing. And sometimes places still operate like that. So
Right.
this just makes it so, you know, the right employees can get there, but also like a rando on the street can't just walk in and, be in your facility all of a sudden, which is really important when you have a big warehouse and you've got a lot of people in there shipping things, and you don't always have a good visual on like who actually is an employee sometimes, especially if you got
Yeah.
a lot of turnover in that situation. So somebody
Right.
can, if you don't have good door security, somebody can literally walk in and take products, cause damage or something like that. And you may not even know that they're necessarily a threat. So that's a
Yeah.
huge part of it too, is keeping,
Perfect.
obviously keeping the products and everything secure, but also keeping your employees secure. You want to make sure that the right people are there, that nobody else can get there. So
Yeah, I've seen some warehouses or worked in warehouses, put access control and video in warehouses that were in some pretty rough neighborhoods.
yeah,
so
yeah,
so
and
security is a huge part of it.
yeah, you want to make sure that only the right people can get in.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then yeah, like you mentioned too, let's jump over to just the office side real quick too. And obviously the office employers going to get into there too, with the office entrance. But one of the things too is, a lot of access control also has what's known as like visitor management
Mhm.
options too. So, with the one that we offer, we do have like a video intercom where you can press a button and it's like a buzzer system that essentially you can allow that person in, or you can talk to them, say, "Hey, how can I help you?" And you can determine if you want to let them into the office space as well. So that
Right.
security aspect also extends to the office employees where, is that a salesperson coming in that you don't want to talk to, or is that somebody who shouldn't be there, or somebody who's, any combination of potential things. You have control on who you want to allow in, and even
Right.
most importantly, you actually can have a conversation with somebody to figure out, are they somebody who I want to let in right now or not.
Right.
So that's another part of that, keeping your employees safe, and your facility safe.
And that's the customizable part, right? There's
Yep.
levels. I mean, you can really lock it down, or you can say, okay, first man in unlocks the door, and the door just stays open, unlocked until 5 o'clock when last man leaves, right? There's all kind and everything in between. This just it's what you feel is best for your company, organization, or business, or building. I'm not saying that all buildings are just one company too. Sometimes you have
Right.
multiple companies and buildings, and so you restrict things to one company that another company might be able to get into. So yeah, a
Yep.
lot of options, and I think I always want to go back to that customizable thing you mentioned, because you can do just about anything with them.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. If you want to keep that, like you said, you can do it. Anything you want. You want to keep that door open, go for it. But if you want to keep it more secure,
Yeah.
you just want it secure, or you want maybe the intercom situation, great.
Right.
Um, And then the interior IT closet, that's like another place inside a facility that obviously has sensitive equipment. Maybe your NVR lives in there, your switches, everything like that, that are a big part of controlling your facility. And if somebody goes in, messes with your internet, either accidentally or potentially on purpose, you could have a really bad day, not be able to ship things, etc. So putting an extra level of security on that is something that would be maybe only the IT manager would be able to access that, or potentially
Right.
two or three other people. Not every single person that's an office employee would be able to access that. Only the select ones.
Yep. Yeah, and not just that. So, there's a lot of ways you can track what's going on with doors. We call it door position, but it's kind of a key thing for like warehouses. Really like to use door position, because a lot of times employees will go outdoors and they'll put a brick on the door and leave it open while they go have a
Yep.
smoke break or something, right?
Yep.
And a lot of companies don't like that or want that.
No.
So it will alert. You can set it to alert the company that the door is open. And then if you want to put a timer on it, say, okay, we'll let people go out for a smoke break, but they got to be back in 10 minutes, or 5 minutes, whatever. You can do that also. Like we said, customizable.
Yep.
But the key ingredient is actually knowing what's happening at a door, knowing what position a door can be in and what it's allowed to be in, so you can make sure that your security is held intact, right? So if you see a door is open and you didn't get a card read because of it, you might want to send someone over there to see, hey, why is that door open, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's a great point too. It gives you insight physically on what the doors are doing as well, not just comes along. Somebody could try to jam the door open or something like that. It's
Right,
kind of let you know too. So that is a
right.
really really good point. Yeah, and then the other door we have in here is like basically the vestibule. I think is kind of the term in terms of like separating the access between the office and the warehouse employees. And you mentioned
Yeah,
this a little bit too, but the obvious thing is most office employees aren't potentially maybe in the warehouse. You need to have closed steel toe boots, or you
right.
need to be wearing safety vests and hard hats and stuff like that. And maybe not all office employees have that, and you don't want them to just be able to roam around in there and get in the way of things potentially, or be a safety hazard. And then vice versa, you may not want the warehouse employees in the office space where they potentially have, you know, records and
Yeah.
uh, documents and anything else that's potentially in there that they have no benefit of potentially seeing. So it just reduces your threat potential by limiting who has act. You only want the right people in the right areas. You don't need them roaming around and
Right.
having access to things they don't. So
I actually have personal experience with that. I worked at a place, gigantic warehouse, and it had a front office area. And what they did was they put the break room in the middle,
yep.
and they had a door where the office people can open the door from from the office side and get into the break room. And then they had another door where the warehouse people could open the door and get into the break room from the warehouse side, but neither could go into the other place's spot.
Yeah.
So it was kind of the only place where all hands could meet together. So it's kind of funny, but it
Yeah.
worked. It did what the client said, because, like you said, there was PPE requirements to work in that warehouse, right?
Yep.
It was dangerous. I mean, they had pickers and loaders and forklifts going all over the place in that place, right? And so
Yep.
they just didn't want office people wandering around in there, and vice versa, you know.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah, and that extends even more if you're in a depends on obviously what you're shipping. Or even if this wasn't a or shipping area, this could be a manufacturing plant, and that same idea applies. You've got a dangerous floor that they're, mixing chemicals and making
right,
products and everything like that that you don't need those office employees into. And yeah, usually like that the break room example is a great idea because that's where it usually might be where the bathrooms are and some of
right,
the common resources and everything like that. But keeping that separation for safety and security reasons is really key. And that's a huge benefit for, this example we're looking at too. So
right.
um yeah, I think that's a really good look at this one here. And
Sure.
one of the last things people probably usually ask with us for access control is going to be what's it cost? And there's a lot of variables there, but I'll let you take that, Gil.
What's it cost? A lot. No, I'm just kidding. It's not cheap. It's
Yeah.
one of the more expensive technologies in security, as far as installation is concerned, right?
Yeah.
Cybersecurity and keeping up with servers and stuff like that for cloud-based stuff is probably the most expensive stuff. But when it comes to physical installation, access controls right up there at the top,
Yeah.
because it takes skill, takes time, takes ability, and you there's a lot of stuff you could screw up. So you just want to make sure you got someone that knows what they're doing and get it right.
Yeah, it has to be done right. And I think back to our conversation earlier just about some of the risk factors that you have with access control, there's skill sets that are being brought in. So when we kind of talked briefly about the cutting the doors and installing electric locking hardware and all that, that comes with certain specialty. You may have to get a locksmith out there to do part of that,
Right.
or depending on the doors, or you may have to get specialty doors. So when we talk about the cost, we're talking not just about, because in all reality, like a reader or the controllers, they aren't crazy expensive. It's more into that getting that locking hardware in is where that real cost ends up being. So,
Right.
and that cost varies a lot based on what factors we're talking: location, labor costs, of course, in that location. Who is even in that location. Sometimes the area might only have one or two people who actually can competently install access control too. So it's like,
Sure.
yeah, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever they want to price it at, basically. But do we have like any kind of rough estimate when we think about it? Like if you're talking like maybe a per door basis?
Yeah, I kind of I'm in the if you want a turnkey solution, that means you want everything installed at a door. So that's your card reader, your electrified lock set, whatever type that is, strike, mag lock, lock set, crash bar could be any of those. A way to egress, which is your request to exit stuff. You might require an emergency button, door position switch, which is a door contact that goes in the door. So all of that is stuff that goes at every door. So usually in the $3,000 to $4,000 per door range will be a safe bet. Now, if you're going to use specialized crash bars, you can up that, of course. And if you're going to use if it's really easy door with a cylinder or lock set, and you just need a little simple strike to put on it, it's going to be less, right?
Yep.
And then everything in between. So I think that's kind of where we ended up. Now, if you don't need door hardware done, you can probably cut that in half. I'd say anywhere in the $1,500 to $2,000 door range.
Yeah, I think that's a great estimate to give people an idea what it costs, and it is expensive. But there's no doubt about that. But one of the things I would say about access control that's generally great is that that investment is there for your extent of your facility, right? Locking
Sure.
hardware doesn't really go out of date. You're not going to replace it because you've got a higher resolution um,
Readers have a
locking
lifetime
hardware.
warranty. I mean,
Yeah, so
this stuff goes in and stays there forever. It can't.
Yeah, and it's part of something that you are literally going to interact with. And in
Yeah,
the case of that warehouse example we just used, that system is going to be used hundreds of times a day, every single
right,
day. And so it, the upfront costs are there. There's no denying that, but it's something that value wise, I think is actually a pretty good value when it comes to actually what you're paying for. Especially if you're new construction, you can kind of plan that out ahead of time to make sure you get electrified hardware into those
right,
doors, and then it kind of the actual, like you mentioned, getting the actual access control components is a lot, cheaper and after than the other
right.
part. So yeah, that's a not cheap, but probably worth it, especially in, like
No,
we
it,
mentioned,
you're,
mission
it's for
critical.
the long haul, right? It's for the
Yep.
long haul. It really pays for itself, I think.
Yep, for sure. Um, yeah, I think that's a wrap up on what we kind of wanted to initially talk about. Obviously, probably in the next ones we'll get more deep into certain components and
Yeah.
a provider and everything like that. But we want to give everyone just sort of a high level look at what access control is, some of the benefits, and brief idea of the cost on what it's going to be. Anything else
Well,
you want to add to that conversation before we pop off though?
no, just remember if you are interested in access control that be prepared to have a conversation about everything associated with the doors that you're interested in access controlling, because there's a lot that goes into it, and the conversation will dictate, obviously improving the price based on everything we can do to get the right stuff on the door. So
And yeah, I think that puts up a great wrap on this episode. We got a good high level look at access control. If you have any questions or want to learn more, leave a comment or reach out to us. If you're interested in access control, reach out to us as well. We can figure out the options that are available for you and talk about the different solutions that we have. Um, Thanks again, Gil, for your time for being
thanks,
here,
Dave.
and we'll see you on the next one.